South Outer Community Conversation. We're going to discuss how the Charlotte Future 2040 policy map will inform future growth, development, and mobility around the city of Charlotte. We are, as you just heard, recording today's meeting for our own reference. And I just want to introduce, we have a couple of staff members from the city of Charlotte on the call. Catherine Mahoney, Robin Byers, Gretchen Flores, and Kathy Cornett are all with the city of Charlotte, and Tracy is with the Charlotte Streets Map team. So we're very happy to have them to assist us. They're going to help me with all the technical stuff and also probably help answer some questions as we move forward. All right, so just a quick set of guidelines. Everyone, please mute your audio when you're not speaking so we can reduce some of that background noise. Obviously, be respectful of other attendees during the session. We'll be saving all of these meeting chats. And if you have any questions before we start, please drop those in the chat. We've got to keep going at a pretty good clip today because there's a lot of content to cover. So at any point, feel free to drop questions in the chat and we'll try and have one of the team members get to those. All right, so in today's meeting, we're going to be providing a brief overview of what was covered in the informational meeting on October 30th. And that includes the purpose of the 2040 policy map and the Charlotte Streets map, and how those two maps relate to one another and the role of each map. So the majority of today's session will be discussing and getting feedback on the draft 2040 policy map. And throughout the meeting, please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat. Again, we have a pretty tight agenda, and anything that we don't answer during the session will be posted with a detailed response online for you all afterwards. So with that, let's briefly review just some background information about the policy map and the streets map. So the purpose of the 2040 policy map, as well as the streets map and the UDO, is to help implement the vision of the 2040 comprehensive plan. That's the guiding document for our city's growth and development over the next 20 years. The comp plan was adopted in June 2021, and there are now several major initiatives underway to help put the plan into action. And you can see all those initiatives on the bottom half of the slide. The 2040 policy map will identify appropriate locations for future development in our neighborhoods. The streets map will define the multimodal vision for Charlotte streets to support mobility between the places we live, work, and play. And the Unified Development Ordinance will consolidate and update the city's land development regulations, so future development is aligned with the vision of the comprehensive plan. And just so folks are aware, a draft of the Unified Development Ordinance was released this month, and you can find that on the city's website. So the 2040 policy map and the Charlotte Streets map will both help implement the vision of the comprehensive plan, and they'll accomplish this by informing how our built environment evolves and changes over time. So the built environment includes both land use and transportation related characteristics. So each map provides information about the places we want to create. In particular, the 2040 policy map will inform the type of development, including land uses and building form, that is appropriate for specific geographies throughout the city, while the streets map will define the future cross sections and streetscape requirements. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the streets map before we move on to the main topic, which is the 2040 policy map. The streets map focuses on the space in between the buildings that provides for mobility. So all the components you can see in the diagram work together to create streets that allow people to move about our city in more ways and also more easily. The streets map is the mapped vision for our multimodal street network, and it's based on council adopted policies. And it's currently in a draft state. And we want to remind everyone that you can go online to review and provide comments on the streets map, along with the policy map through November 14th. So in this fun little online setup they've got, you can click on an arterial street and there will be a pop-up box that includes information about the cross section, and you can review it all. You can make comments on the streets that you're interested in, and you can do this for as many streets as you'd like. There are more detailed instructions on how to review and comment on the map at charlottegov.me/CLTfuture. Today, we're going to be focusing on the 2040 policy map, but if you do have any questions or comments on the street, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll pass them along to the streets map team who will post responses on the project website. Okay, so to dive into the main topic, and it is a meaty one, the policy map is a companion document to the comprehensive plan, and it will translate what we call the plan's place-based policies into specific geographies in the community. So a place-based policy are those that provide guidance for where and how development should occur. When adopted, the 2040 policy map will replace the city's current policy map, which is called the future land use map. The policy map aims to provide a comprehensive and citywide direction for accommodating Charlotte's projected growth, while also protecting features that are important to residents, such as the natural environment and established neighborhoods. The mapping effort will also ensure that we align future growth with infrastructure capacity. And based on community guidance through the comprehensive plan, we know that we need to grow in a way that is equitable for everyone. We want to make sure that we aren't repeating the mistakes of the past, and we want to make sure that we provide access to those who have been historically underserved. Since the objective of this mapping effort is to evaluate and balance citywide needs and opportunities, the policy map will not really provide parcel-specific or block-by-block analysis. That level of analysis will occur in the community area planning process that will take place after the policy map is adopted. So you're going to hear us talk a lot today about place types, and place types are a classification system to organize patterns of development. So they are more high level than the details of a zoning district, and they're more holistic than just land use. Land use only talks about the type of development, whether that be residential or commercial on a property, but a place type looks at the whole picture for that place. So that includes land use, building form, mobility, and open space. So just to give you an example, an area of single family zoning, which maybe would just be zoned as R1, would now fall into the neighborhood 1 place type, which is that light yellow color you see on the map, and would therefore, because it's that place type, it would receive guidance about not just the use, but also the character, the streets, all the things that make that area a recognizable and livable place. So through the comp plan, 10 place types were created to classify those different types of development in Charlotte. The place types were vetted by the community during the plan, and the policy map's now going to apply those 10 places to specific areas throughout the community. So just to give you a little familiarity with that palette, here is the full place types palette, and we generally organize them into categories of live, work, and play place types. So at the live scale, we have the neighborhoods. Neighborhood 1 is the more low density neighborhoods, whereas neighborhood 2 is higher density, as well as parks and preserves. The workplaces include commercial areas, campus areas, which could include an office park or a hospital campus, innovation mixed use, which usually describes a lower intensity residential use that might also include some residential or some more creative uses like art studios or breweries. And then manufacturing and logistics, which is a pretty fancy word for a number of industrial places. And then finally, the play places are kind of that broadest category. These are mixed use centers. They range in scale from the smallest and least dense, which is the neighborhood center, to the community activity center, which is usually larger and more dense, to the regional activity center, which really draws like a regional group of people. And because these are mixed use places, they include housing, they include commercial, and they usually are more dense and more walkable than just a commercial place. So with those 10 place types in mind, what we're looking at today is the first draft map of applying those place types to specific locations in Charlotte. So this process happened in 3 steps. The first step was to translate the existing development, what's on the ground today, into that place types palette. So it's translating that area of single family housing into a neighborhood 1 area. The second step was to translate the city's adopted area plans into place types. This step shows how Charlotte would grow if we did nothing different, if we didn't map the comprehensive plan policies. It basically shows us what the city would look like if we continued with business as usual. So we're calling that the adopted policies map, but I just want to remind everyone that it doesn't include the policy guidance from the comprehensive plan. It's just mapping those pre-comprehensive plan policies. The third step is built upon that adopted policies map and then revised to reflect those comprehensive policies. By building off of the adopted policy map, this process doesn't erase those past planning efforts, those past area plans that are still valuable to our community. It respects those and acknowledges what's working for our community, and then only revises the shortcomings that fail to address the city's current and future needs. So there were several data inputs into each of those three steps. The first on the left there is that existing development. And then next for the adopted policies map, the first major input was the future land use recommendations from area plans that were adopted since 2010. So these provide guidance for a little less than a third of the city. So that means more than 2/3 of the city didn't have any area plan guidance. So for the remaining portions of the city, the adopted policy map was informed by the zoning or the existing entitlements on a property. In instances where that existing zoning didn't really clearly translate to one place type, we used market support to identify what was the most realistic use of the property. As mentioned, the draft policy map then built upon that adopted policies map by revising it to reflect the new direction of the comprehensive plan. And the major inputs we used to revise it and produce that draft 2040 map, which is what we're looking at today, that includes the equitable growth framework, which maps where the needs of the community aren't being met, and then the preservation policies, which protect areas of the community that people told us were important to preserve in Charlotte. And then finally, those draft recommendations were checked against several other data sources. That includes our growth projections, environment and infrastructure capacity, and market realities. So with that overview, we'd like to walk through how the process I just described played out in the South Outer area. So this area is generally bounded by 45 on the north, and then the Lancaster Highway, the South Carolina border, and the city border with Weddington on the south. And the biggest recognizable landmark here is Ballantyne in that top left corner. So as I mentioned, the mapping approach began by translating what's on the ground today and then what future place types would look like without the comprehensive plan. So we're going to look at both of those maps really quick. This is the existing development. It reflects what is on the ground translated into that place type palette based on existing uses and development patterns. So this area has a pretty wide mix of uses. It includes single family neighborhoods and then commercial, office, campus, and neighborhood 2 all around Ballantyne. And then there's mixed use areas around the Waverly Mall at Providence Road and Audrey Kell. There's also a large quarry on the southern end that's designated as manufacturing and logistics. That's that guy. You can also see some pretty large areas of vacant land. All right, and so then the second step in the mapping approach was to translate the city's adopted policies and existing entitlements into place types. And you can see the net change from the existing development map we just looked at to this map on the right side of the slide. So you can see that most of the vacant, the manufacturing, and the parks land was all changed to neighborhood 1, as it wasn't protected by any policies before the comprehensive plan. There's also significantly more neighborhood 2. Ballantyne was designated as a community activity center, and the center around Waverly Mall was reduced in size and scale. So again, this really reflects what this area would look like if we continued with business as usual without the comprehensive plan. All right, so now we're going to walk through how the place types you just saw were revised to better align with the vision of the community and the comprehensive plan. This is building up to the full 2040 policy map. And first, we'll look at the mapping of the preservation policies. The comprehensive plan includes a number of policies to preserve existing neighborhood 1, parks and preserves, and also manufacturing and logistics, as it provides a lot of jobs. And you can see those 3 place types shown here on the map. So the areas highlighted in blue show what would have not been preserved if we didn't implement the comprehensive plan guidance. So you can see that a lot of parks and existing neighborhoods are being preserved here, as well as the manufacturing use of the quarry in the south. You can see the percentage change in these place types on the right of the slide. And as we step through each of these place types and policies on the 2040 policy map, we'd like to ask some questions about what you've seen reflected in the draft so far. We think a number of steps described in the current mapping approach are accomplishing the goals of the comprehensive plan, but we'd really like to hear whether or not you agree. So later in the session, we'll have the chance to talk about potential changes to the current mapping approach. But for now, we'd like to ask you about 2 of the places we just saw in that preservation policies map. So neighborhood 1 and parks and preserves. So the question is, the mapping step to preserve neighborhood 1 and parks and preserves aligns with the Charlotte Future 2040 comprehensive plan's direction to protect community assets. So you can answer anywhere from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And I'll give folks a couple minutes to do that. And we won't go into too much detail on these answers, but if you do want to, we welcome you to tell us why you voted a certain way in the chat, and we'll save those responses and include them in how we're revising the map in the future. All right, looks like everyone's agreeing at this point. So we will move on to the next phase. If I can close the poll. There we go. Okay, so next we'll look at the mapping of the access to opportunity policies. And just to give everyone a quick rundown of the equitable growth framework, which we're talking about and using heavily in this process, the comprehensive plan calls for creating a more equitable future, which means we need to ensure future growth and development benefits everyone. In order to measure who does and doesn't currently benefit from past development, the comprehensive plan included what we call the equitable growth framework, which is a series of maps and inputs that identify, using concrete data, which areas have low access to housing, to jobs, to goods and services, and which areas are impacted by environmental justice issues. So on this map, areas outside of the black hatches are lacking access to housing diversity, meaning that you can't easily find a variety of housing types in these areas. So you can see there's a fair amount of that area in this geography. And the bullet points on the page for your reference are the metrics that we use to understand where access to housing is currently lacking. So neighborhood 2 is a place type that helps provide more housing opportunities through housing unit diversity, basically giving people choices of different housing types beyond just single family. So here you can see in that orange color where neighborhood 2 is being mapped. And we looked at several features when identifying opportunities for more housing, including environmental features, development status, proximity to transit, land suitability, density, etc. So there was a lot that went into identifying where those areas could be added. You can see here that there is a lot of neighborhood 2 on the map, just not always in the areas that are lacking that access. And so it's also worth noting that the activity center place types, which we'll look at in a few slides, can also provide some more housing opportunities. And again, those areas highlighted in blue are the ones that were specifically preserved as part of the comprehensive plan policies. All right, so turning off all of those overlays, here you can clearly see the first 4 place types of the 2040 policy map. So again, we'd like to ask a question about this step of the mapping. We are trying to ensure that the current mapping approach is accomplishing the goals of the comprehensive plan, particularly around housing diversity. But again, we'd like to hear whether or not you agree. So the question here is mapping more neighborhood 2 in areas with low access to housing opportunity a good approach to increasing housing diversity in the future? And this is really just asking about the approach to the mapping. It's not necessarily whether or not it's working in that specific area. As you know, South Outer is pretty built out and it lacks, some development opportunity as there's so much going on there already. So this is really thinking about, is the approach to mapping neighborhood 2 something that we want to move forward with? All right, so I think we are good on that. Looks like everyone who's not a staff member answered. So I will briefly share those results and then we'll move on to the next section. And again, if you want to tell us why you agreed or disagreed, definitely please drop that in the chat. It's valuable information for us as we move forward in revising the process. Okay, next we will look at mapping of the access to employment opportunity policies, which is the second component of the equitable growth framework. So now on this map, areas outside of the black hatches are lacking existing access to employment opportunity. So places where it's hard to get to diverse types of jobs. The bullet points on this page are the metrics that we use to understand where access is currently lacking. So campus and innovation mixed use are 2 place types that can help provide more employment opportunities within close proximity to neighborhoods. Here you can see in teal where there's some campus being added. The small area of campus was added along Johnston Road, but there's not really any innovation mixed use being added in this area. Again, because it's already pretty built out. But I will mention once again that when we get to the center place types, those will also help fill some of the employment gaps. Again, like the last set of maps we looked at, we did evaluate a lot of features when looking for areas to add employment opportunities. And I'll just mention that Robert in the chat said, I agree with the method in this particular case due to build out, it will have very little effect. And yeah, very much agreed on that front. South Outer is a particularly interesting case because it is already a very built out part of the city. All right, so we took off the overlays. Here you can clearly see the first 6 place types on the 2040 policy map. And again, we'd like to ask a question about this step of the mapping, looking at improving access to jobs. So again, thinking about the approach to the mapping and maybe not specifically how it's going for South Outer, since we do have those limitations there, is mapping campus and innovation mixed use in areas with low access to jobs a good approach to increasing job access in the future?
So we are having some technical issues with our polling. This happens at the lunchtime events a lot. So I will type in the poll question in the chat here, just a minute, and you guys can see it and respond in the chat if you will.
Yeah, so feel free to just type in whether or not you agree with that statement.
Robin, do you need me to find the questions on the share drive so you don't have to type?
That would be amazing. Thank you.
I thought we were cruising when we hit the first two poll questions without issue.
I don't know why it does it.
Great, and yeah, the answers are on that same scale that we've used in the previous ones. All right, we've got an agree and a strongly agree. Give just one more second to drop any answers in the chat or any additional thoughts you have on this step. All right, and to keep up with our pace, I will keep moving. So as the last step, we're looking at mapping to the access of essential amenities, goods, and services, which is the third component of the equitable growth framework. On this map, areas outside of the black diagonal hatches are lacking existing access to essential amenities, goods, and services. So those are areas where we shop, where we get entertainment, where we access services like daycare and banks. And you can see that this area is pretty well served with that access. But for this process, we added centers, which are the mixed use areas, as well as commercial areas to fill that gap. And it's important to note that because a mix of uses occurs in centers, it will help also fill some gaps for housing and jobs as well. So you get the new service like the bank, but you're also providing jobs for those employed by those services. So the commercial and activity centers are place types that provide more access to amenities. You can see in the red, pink, blue, and navy where these 4 place types are being mapped. And the big changes in this area are recommending that the Blakeney and Waverly malls become community activity centers, and that Ballantyne becomes a larger regional activity center. So those areas will provide more access to dense goods, services, and even housing options. And turning off that hatch, you can see all of those place types. This is the full set of 10. So this is now reflecting the complete 2040 policy map. All right, now that you've seen the full 2040 policy map, which we'll spend a little more time looking at here shortly, do you agree with the approach to the access to goods and services? Is mapping activity centers in areas with low access to goods and services a good approach to increasing access to goods and services in the future?
And again, I've put that in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, and we're using that same scale of strongly agree to strongly disagree. All right, we've got a couple of agrees in the chat, it looks like. And again, in the interest of time, I'll keep moving, but please let us know why you chose that option, or if there's anything else you want us to consider in relation to mapping access to goods and services. So the last component of the equitable growth framework is environmental justice. On this map, areas outside of the black diagonal hatches are impacted by environmental justice issues. And oftentimes the issues that we're looking at are housing, areas of housing, particularly neighborhood 1 housing in close proximity to large transportation infrastructure like highways. A few things to note here is that the new and more intense place types were not mapped in the floodplain, and that the place type mapping effort was attempting to use buffering and transitions to reduce the proximity between those low density neighborhoods and those heavy industrial uses or major transportation infrastructure. Unfortunately, opportunities to provide buffering or transitions are pretty limited based on the build out of the existing development. It's hard to retrofit that kind of thing. So other tools outside of place types will definitely be explored to help address these inequities, because it's definitely an important part of the comprehensive plan. So the last question before we start talking about potential changes to the current approach is, how important is it to explore additional tools to further mitigate environmental justice impacts during the community area planning process? And the scale on this one's a little different. It's very important, important, neutral, unimportant, or very unimportant. All right. Looks like everyone agrees with us that it's pretty important. So we will move on to the next step now. Next, we want to highlight what the above mentioned place type recommendations mean for this area in terms of attracting new housing units and future jobs. So this is really looking at the allocation of future growth. The city of Charlotte is projected to grow almost 150,000 housing units by 2040. Given the place type recommendations within this planning area, it would be projected to capture almost 16,000 housing units, or about 11% of all new housing units citywide. And you can see on the heat map there that a lot of that is concentrated around Ballantyne and along Providence Road. In terms of new jobs, the place type recommendations within this geography will bring approximately 13,700 new jobs, which is about 7% of the almost 200,000 new jobs projected for Charlotte by 2040. And again, you can see in the heat map that a lot of that's happening around Ballantyne and along Providence Road. So now that we've walked through the draft policy map recommendations, we'd like to get your feedback on the draft mapping approach overall. The objective of this conversation is to collect feedback both on the current steps in the mapping approach as well as potential revisions to the approach. So there are two types of feedback that we can use to revise the mapping approach. First, we're going to ask you a couple of poll questions, probably in the chat since the polling feature does not seem to be working. But we're going to ask you to identify additional steps we could add to the mapping approach, which would help it better align with the comprehensive plan policies. After that, we can discuss potential adjustments to the current mapping steps that would help improve the accuracy of the map. And we know that this is just a first pass, and we hope that during this engagement, we can hear about what is working, what we can do better in the next draft. And I just want to note again that because this is a citywide map, we really need to balance the long-term needs and opportunities. So we want to avoid super parcel specific or block by block changes and stick to looking at the overall approach so that we can be consistent in how place types are mapped across the city and so that no one area gets special treatment. All right, so turning our attention to the first of our conversation questions, what might be missing from the mapping approach? So we recognize that the current mapping approach is just a starting point, and we may need to add some additional steps to better align the map with the comprehensive plan. We want to share a few suggestions for additional steps with you all, and then see whether or not you agree with those suggestions. So the additional steps that we've heard from our interdepartmental stakeholders are related to 3 of the 10 place types. And first, we're going to look at what we heard about manufacturing and logistics. We've heard from our partners in economic development that some of the existing manufacturing and logistics sites, especially those close to uptown, may be better suited for other uses due to the changing needs of the manufacturing industry. So our question for you all is it important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics sites, or to consider where repurposing these areas may better serve other community needs in the future? So the options here are: it's more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics, neutral, or it's more important to consider repurposing manufacturing. All right, Mark says we should look at repurposing it, as does Douglas. All right, and then we have a more important to preserve existing manufacturing and logistics. So, you know, some different opinions here. We're gonna have to look and see, like, citywide, what that feedback means and how much we hear from people on that. Moving on to the next question, we're gonna look at what we've observed related to neighborhood 2. We observed that a lot of large single family lots located along major transportation corridors in the city. These sites could evolve to neighborhood 2 to provide more housing options in the future. So the question is it more important to preserve existing single family lots or to provide more housing options along major corridors? So again, this is looking at neighborhoods along major transportation corridors and whether they should be preserved as single family lots, or if it's more important to provide more housing options in the form of neighborhood 2. And again, as you provide your answers, definitely feel free to tell us why you feel that way. Great, okay. We have a neutral and then 2 folks in favor of more neighborhood 2. And I like what Robert Allen said, that we need to evolve. All right, finally, let's look at what we heard about the commercial place type. We've heard from some of our planning colleagues that a lot of the existing commercial development throughout Charlotte doesn't align with the comprehensive plan's vision for walkable and integrated communities. So our question to you all is, how important is it that commercial places in this community planning area evolve into neighborhood activity centers? Is it very important, important, neutral, unimportant, or very unimportant? So again, looking at the fact that commercial areas usually aren't as walkable, they are usually a little more spread out. How much do we want to look at converting those into more dense and walkable places in the form of community activity centers? And just so folks know, this wouldn't be an across the board conversion. It would be more looking at which commercial areas are close to neighborhood 1 or neighborhood 2, which are close to parks and preserves or along local streets, and using those inputs to determine whether or not they're appropriate to be evolved into neighborhood activity centers. All right, got some good answers coming in the chat. I agree, Robert, that you shouldn't have to have a vehicle to access goods and services. All right, and in the interest of time, we will move on. We want to make sure we have plenty of time to look at the map and discuss that together. So finally, we're going to talk about any concerns you have with the draft map. And by talking through specific concerns, we expect we'll be able to identify adjustments to the mapping approach to help make the next draft more accurate. So just to provide a few examples of potential adjustments, maybe if a certain size or a certain site isn't showing up as the expected place type, perhaps it's too small of a site to qualify as a separate place. And we can look at those and adjust the place type thresholds if there's enough examples of that identified. Or if a certain site isn't showing up as the expected place type, perhaps the existing entitlements weren't translated properly. So we'll document any of those potential zoning errors and make revisions to the next draft map. So to just give you guys a rundown of how we're hoping to do this, we can't sit around a table with a map and a bunch of markers, which is what we like to do. So instead, we're going to use Zoom's annotate feature instead. To open the annotate feature, it's going to be in one of 2 places, and it seems like it varies for people. So it's either going to be on the right side of your bottom bar, or if you go to the top of the screen where it says you are viewing, you should see an option to drop down different view options. and you should be able to see the annotate button there. And since there's just 3 of us, I think we can definitely talk through any technical issues anyone's having and make sure everyone can find it. Once you select the annotate feature, you can use the stamp tool, and we're asking that people use the heart stamp on the map because it's easier to see. So is everyone seeing the annotate button? Any issues? Cool. Oh, I don't know if that's a no, you don't see it, or a no, there's no issues.
No, Mackenzie, I can't locate it on here.
Okay, let's see. So I'm guessing if it's not on the bottom bar, which is where it'd be most visible, it's going to be in the view options drop down. Catherine or Robin, have you guys had any issues with that?
Well, I was going to ask Mr. Allen if you're on a tablet or a phone.
I'm on a PC.
Okay. Yeah, do you not see, hover over the view options and look for annotate.
Yeah, the only thing I've got there is speaker and gallery.
Hmm.
Well, I don't want to hold you guys up. I mean, you know.
Yeah, speaker and gallery are the view that's all the way to the right. Do you see a green bar at the top in the center that says you're viewing Mackenzie Taylor's screen?
Let's see. No, I do not.
Okay.
Okay. Well, luckily we have a good backup for this, which is just you can verbally or in the chat tell us what areas you want to talk about.
And we can move our mouse around and you can say like hot or cold, you know, you can let us know if we're in the general vicinity.
Yeah, we will definitely jerry rig it a bit and make it work. So for those of you who do have the annotate feature going, you can click on the map to place your heart stamp. And if you need to fix or remove a stamp, you use the eraser tool, or if you need to get back to your normal mouse, you can find the little mouse button on the far left side of that annotate bar. So we're going to pull up the map and then give everyone a chance to place their heart stamps. And so we're just using a heart stamp because it's easiest to see. If you place a heart stamp somewhere, it doesn't necessarily mean you like it. Or it may mean you have concerns about that area or you have questions about it. And after everyone's placed their stamps or dropped their comments in the chat, we'll take a screenshot and discuss the areas that folks are curious about. So I'm going to give everyone a couple minutes to put some stamps on or put some comments in the chat, and then we can talk about some of these specific areas on the map that people are having concerns or questions about. Or if you really like something, you know, we can talk about that too.
Mr. Allen, if there's a place you want us to put a heart, you can put it in the chat or just let us know and we'll add it.
Yeah, we've got a small group. So if folks want to just unmute and talk to us, ask us any questions you have, we've got the time and we've got the capacity to really have that conversation.
Yeah, I found the stamp.
Nice.
I'm looking at the gallery instead of going over to the map feature because I'm using multiple monitors.
I gotcha.
So.
And just checking in if Mr. Welton or Mr. Laughlin, did you guys have any questions about the annotate tool? Any issues accessing it or any areas you want to talk about?
I didn't have any issues with that, and I just typed into the the chat. I in general, I understand the process and having seen it numerous times. My issue, and it's not necessarily, it's a neutral issue, is that some of the areas that I've seen that are affected, the neighbors who were affected by that were unaware of this process. And if we don't get those folks to be aware of the changes that are coming to their particular portion of town, they may be, on the resident journey, they may be on the sad face side of the map. And so it's just a concern that I have, that we get to those people when an area has been modified, that we get the message there to them. So.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And we admittedly have not had the attendance we wanted on this first phase. So we're definitely gonna ramp up the online portion, make sure that people in these neighborhoods know what's going on, and also make sure that that's really robust for the second phase of the mapping when we have a revised map as well, so that everyone can see where those changes are happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good comment. All right, we have a couple hearts on the screen. Mark, I just saw your cursor, so I'll give you a second to place any others that you want to talk about.
Thank you. I just had a general comment or two, but
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah, do you want to tackle those now, and then we can talk about the two areas on the map that have some stamps on them?
I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'll get back in just a second.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
I was doing two things at once. Sorry.
No problem. Robert, I believe you placed the heart stamps on that quarry manufacturing logistics area on the south. Do you want to talk about your questions about that area?
Well, I'm more curious about what the plan is. I mean, it's almost unfair to you guys to be looking at this particular section of the city. There's not a whole lot you can be able to do with it. I mean, the impact's going to be very, very limited. And so I guess my questions are, is that I guess it would be the southwestern side down there, that little purple area with manufacturing logistics. Do you have any idea? I mean, I'm assuming it's already zoned for that sort of activity. It doesn't really have a lot of connectivity as far as heavy traffic. You've got Johnson Road, the 521, which don't really have any rail or that sort of thing. And I'm more curious about what is there now and how's it lend itself, because it,
Yeah, it's a good question. So I believe the current use of that site is a large quarry. I'm not totally sure if it's like still fully operating, but to my knowledge it is. And so the reason why that's still on the map is that the comprehensive plan policy that we asked about in terms of preserving those manufacturing logistics areas, as they do provide a certain type of jobs that you can't find in a lot of places of the city. So we want to make sure that we're keeping some of those job types, particularly those that don't require a 4-year degree. So that's why it's staying on the map. In terms of like specific plans on a site-by-site basis, this effort isn't really going into that level of detail, but it would probably be covered in the community area planning process.
I think I figured out what I was going to ask. I've attended several of these, and I think it would be very helpful if there was a way to maybe extend to show what land is vacant. It's a little difficult to pick up sometimes what's vacant and what's not vacant, and I think that would be important. I think the other thought was when you're trying, as far as greenways and things like that are not shown on here as being connected, how was that taken in? Because along the very southern border is the 6 Mile Creek Greenway, which will extend all the way up and eventually, all the way over to the nature preserve in over here. My mind just went blank. But anyway, how was that handled? As make sure we preserve that corridors for the greenways. Thank you.
Yeah, good questions on both fronts. So to answer the first one about the vacant area, we have that shown on the existing place types map, but it's a good point that it would take a lot for us to flip all the way back to that map to cross check which areas are vacant and how they're being filled in here. So maybe in this next phase, we'll look at some type of hatch or something, or something we can like flip between to show where those vacant areas are and how they're being filled in. In terms of the greenways, we're not looking at that detailed of a level. Really, it's saying that overall, we want to preserve parks and preserves areas as was laid out in the comprehensive plan. And so anything that has that current use would be preserved for that use. And I'll let Catherine chime in if she has anything else on that.
Sorry, I was documenting one question when Mr. Laughlin was talking. So Mr. Laughlin, you were asking about preserving specific Greenway corridors on this 2040 map?
Yeah, I was just wanting to make sure it was addressed somehow, because what it's showing up as the neighborhood one. So I guess it's in there, but it's also considered neighborhood one.
Exactly. The nature of the place types allow greenways and encourage greenway connections in all places. So we don't have to be that specific on this 2040 map about where future greenways are expected, because they're allowed and encouraged in all places.
And one final thing, and this kind of goes more to the streets and the road corridors, the connection from Johnston Road across Audrey Kell all the way over to Providence is going to be extremely important in the future. And I'm not sure the DOT has that high up on their radar, but as you know, it's a 2-lane road throughout there. So I'm very concerned that any neighborhood 2 densities, you already have the largest high school, the largest middle school, and a future elementary school along Audrey Kell. I just hope that that's weighed into where these neighborhood 2s and the higher densities are placed. I do agree that maybe along Ray Road and Audrey Kell, some forms of neighborhood 2 would be appropriate. I just think we need to be very careful along that, particularly along Audrey Kell High School section. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, that is a good comment and a really good thing that we'll note and pass on to the streets team. Tracy, I don't know if you're still on, but if you had anything specific you want to say to that, you are welcome to chime in. Otherwise, we'll make sure that comment gets passed along. All right. I will take that silence as agreement. So the last area that we had a little heart on that we haven't talked about yet is the area of parks and preserves up on that right side, that upper right side. Let's see. Robert, was it you that placed that stamp, and did you want to talk about that area at all?
Yeah, I was just, back again to what's there and what's the future. I'm not knowledgeable on that area. Is that part of that preserve that's right there at, what is it, 84 and Providence Road? I think it's a farm or something up there.
That is a
It's,
good question.
The Francis Beatty Park, the large
Okay.
regional park.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would certainly remain as part of the place types mapping process. Again, with that step that we're preserving areas of parks and preserves, we're preserving manufacturing, logistics, as well as existing neighborhoods.
Mark brought up something that, we were talking about the connectivity, and I'm very passionate about the fact that, and probably more relevant today than anything else, where I will bet that most of us are, sitting at home, working from home, and then that connectivity. For instance, you've got the McAlpin Greenway, and you've got neighborhoods. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful trail. I mean, it's asphalted, you got all that there. And I mean, you see people from those neighborhoods utilizing that for the connectivity to go over into, I think there's a Hickory Tavern there, LA Fitness is there, that area. And I think that would be a consideration, particularly with emphasis on environment, bicycle, pedestrian type things, to include that connectivity, because it's viable. That's what you're using it for. So I mean,
Yeah.
back to what Mark said, that I mean, the greenways are very, very important, but also lends that connectivity from one neighborhood to those areas where you can shop and goods and services.
Definitely. Yeah, we absolutely agree. And it is a key policy in the comprehensive plan to preserve and enhance those in all place types. So we are at time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here. So I'm just going to really briefly talk about the next steps. And if you have any final questions or comments, again, feel free to put them in the chat or go through the online feature, which you can find on the city's website. So just a heads up to everyone that these community conversations are going through November 10th. We're recording all of them and putting them on the project website. There will also be makeup sessions scheduled for anyone who misses their area or has additional questions, as well as in-person office hours to answer some of those more detailed thoughts. The online comment application is going to be open through November 14th. And there are also hard copies of the comment form available in libraries and YMCAs. So we encourage you to put any other comments or thoughts you have, either in the online platform or through one of those hard copy comment forms. The community feedback will be used to identify citywide revisions to the mapping approach, and a second draft of the map is expected in early 2022 based on the comments that we're hearing through this process. I want to thank everyone today for participating. This was a great session. It was great to hear your thoughts. We had really good questions. And Catherine is dropping some important links in the chat for anything else that you may need. So I'll hang out for a second just so everyone can use those links as needed. And again, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it.